everyone. Welcome to another awesome day of FileMaker training. I'm Richard Carlton, creator of fmtraining.tv, where every day at this time slot, we are doing FileMaker training. And this week is all about OData. So for those of you who are not, understand how we do things here on the live stream, we frequently find topics of things that we don't know, and we bring in experts from outside. I've got a request into Kevin Frank, Wim DeCourt, a bunch of people that are in that, A list of people who have specific areas of knowledge that they're quite good at. So John Renfrew is here with us, and he's talking about OData. So OData is I'm sure he's going to explain to all of us here in a more professional sort of way, but it's a way of talking to FileMaker. Essentially, it seems kind of like REST-ish, I guess. I'm sure he'll explain this, but it's something that we started using the data API, and then OData came along, and a bunch of people at Claris said, "Oh, this is really important. This is amazing. This is great." And we're like, "Well, dude, we're using the data API, the DAPI already technology. So what is OData, and why do I give it? Why do I care?" And John has all of these answers here. So he's going to start here momentarily, and he's here all this week. We're very excited to have him. John, welcome. What are we doing?
This is a great opportunity, Richard, because as you said to me, I don't know anything about this. And therefore, by doing this for over 5 days, there's an opportunity to not to jump forward and assume you know things. So we really can start at the beginning, first principles, what's it all about? How does it work? Because along the way, there are things to learn, even at the call it the base level. And that's what I'm keen on, making sure it's a good training event for people. So I'm not intending to try and patronize anybody who's on the call who knows stuff already at the beginning. But the point is, this is hopefully a resource and for people who really just want to know everything about OData.
So our target customer or target audience here is, and it's free. Target audience, I guess, is better than target customer, is people who I would say are more intermediate. In my case, I'm kind of mostly a senior engineer, except for like certain vertical areas that I don't know anything about. Margaret is a junior person that's moving into the intermediate area. In fact, every once in a while, she zings me with a question I don't know the answer to. Beverly Voth, there's a bunch of very senior people here, but I think this is an underserved topic. I don't remember too much training on this.
No, I agree. I said to you, that if you Google FileMaker OData presentation, most of the things on the internet already are, in fact, me, it has to be said. But they're all like 45-minute sessions where you're just doing one thing. So this is an opportunity to kind of put everything together, hopefully in a way that makes the journey make sense for people by the time we get to some very difficult things at the end. So,
Perfect. Okay.
The other point is there's plenty of time. So hopefully Margaret is able to write and can keep a note of all of the questions that we want to bundle up, maybe for part of Friday, to go, hey, here's some actual really good questions. Let's bundle
Okay. Do you
together.
want any in-flight questions or not really, John? How do you want to play that?
I think you'll find the first half of today shouldn't generate any, but particularly, I want to know that people are understanding what I'm saying. So if there's things that people don't quite understand and need me to repeat, because as I frequently repeat, today's presentation is in fact delivered in the English language. And for those of you who are in some other country, that may be not quite so understandable. But anyway,
all right, let's go.
John and Richard are going to play OData for a couple of days. Okay. So Richard, now obviously the answer to this question could be any things, but what might this be?
It's a grid, or if I was an engineer and answering it that way, I'd say a two-dimensional array, maybe. I don't know. List, grid.
Okay, so if I add another thing like this to it, what's it starting to look like? Maybe
3D object, maybe, or two grids.
Tables, spreadsheets.
Yeah, it could be tables, spreadsheets. Yeah, Excel. Okay, yeah, there we go.
So I'm going to start by arguing that for most of us, our model of data has been fixed in this way for a very long time. It's a grid of rows and columns. There is a finite limit in Excel, but in databases there's effectively much more nearer an infinite limit. You can have several thousand columns and several hundreds of thousands of rows, but that's our model of data. Okay, it's grid based. Now, some clever people have come along since then and done something like MongoDB, which is not that, but for many of us this is our model of data. And this has been our abstract model of how data works with each other. We have a series of boxes, and then in one of them there's a key, and in the other one there's a space for a foreign key, we'll call it, or some other key. And you can draw a diagram that says, oh, this links to this. Now, literally in FileMaker, this is what we do. And you create this for creating a SQL thing, but there's no actual joins in SQL. But this is our head model, I think, of data. And obviously some really clever people over the years have gone off and generated whole systems that underneath are that, but they are very, very different on the surface. So we have SQL, which is like an open sourcey thing, but we have the Microsoft version of it, and obviously other words we might have heard like Oracle or Postgres and things. So this has been the space in which we've been working as database professionals for quite a long time. We have some people who've made things that are around that model, but they're all proprietary. So the way of connecting to those things is based on each individual vendor. And we've been doing it for quite a long time with a thing called a driver, something that maybe the vendor provides that enables us to connect our system to their system. And obviously we're not going to discuss it, but we're all aware of ODBC or the Java version JDBC. But this works with a thing called a driver. So like a printer driver, it's a thing that connects your machine to that printer, and it's specific for that printer. Okay. And obviously the point is they're created by vendors, and this connector won't work with other systems. So you might end up with 10 or 12 different drivers on your system. And there are different flavors based on the operating system you're working on as well. And it's not an unknown thing that when there are updates to either the server at one end or the operating system at the other end, they have a habit of breaking. Java used to break the JDBC connector quite frequently, and you have lots to do to download them. But that's the field in which we've been playing for quite a long time. Hand-drawn ink, copyright me. We've got some software on our machine that uses some kind of driver to talk to the database. We need to know, well, where the server is, but often we need to know what port it's running. We need to know the name of the database. We need a username and a password. And you create a thing called a DSN.
Okay, for those of you who have not gone through and done this all sucks. This is why I've always hated ODBC. Just give me 30 seconds here, John. For example, get the Mac to talk to an Oracle database fundamentally, or SQL or whatever it is. And on Windows, it can be better, but not always. You have to install these drivers, and you have to configure these items right here. And frequently, if you get it working, then the next time you patch your Mac or patch Windows, or you patch the server on the other end, something breaks. That's assuming you could get it set up in the first place. I beat my head many times. I used to work with Alexi Folger back when she was an SA Claris, trying to figure this. Drove me nuts. Drove me absolutely nuts. For those of you who are good at this, like the Wim de Korts, Jacob Taylor, some of you are really technically like to get down the weeds on the command line on the computer, then this is not intimidating. But if you're a normal FileMaker developer who doesn't spend all their time wanting to do command line, this is not fun. And so, John, I'm assuming, go ahead, I'm going to kick it to you, but I'm assuming that you're saying that we probably don't need to do this, right? With what we're doing.
Well, Shall we see? The point is, it's mostly it's on your machine. So the minute you buy a new machine, you've got to go through setting it all up again. So there was a way for us to do it on a server, but usually that would cost us more for the licenses to do that, blah, blah, blah. But that's the field in which we have been operating. Okay, so this is a quote from ZDNet in 2012. So this is now 12 years ago. The secret to data in the future will not be with the repositories which contain the data, but the way we transport that data back and forth from applications, online services, and the cloud. Okay, so just let that sink in. It's not about where it lives. It's about how we can move it or access it and move it to another place and do something with it. That's like a 12 years ago view of the future. Now, we do this process every day when we use a web browser. A web browser is a piece of software. It kind of goes, here's a URL to your favorite website. Can I have the page? Can I click on the link and go to another place? We've got very sophisticated about the transport mechanism, and technically a browser is a sophisticated piece of software, but you never think about it because it just works. That's the other factor with how that is. So if we apply that to databases at the other end, let's ignore the fact that some websites are technically databases. Can we make this whole thing easier by using the way that browsers work with the software that we need to connect to pure databases? Okay, that is the fundamental question that we're going to talk about. And the first thing to do is to move where that driver or library sits away from us to the other side, to where the database server is. So anything that's like technology specific, rather than us having to deal with it, somebody else deals with it and kind of presents itself to us. So as a concept, obviously we haven't even mentioned the word OData yet, but as a concept, what we're looking for is that you as a user don't need to know anything about configuration. And because we understand that, like web tech, ask for this, get an answer, is a well understood traffic method. And obviously we talk about it now in terms of interacting with systems. We call it REST, where we're doing more than just getting things. But that's why when your website doesn't work, you get a page with a 404 error because it's a web error, or a 503 because your server isn't there. But on top of that, what if the database itself could kind of tell you everything it needed to know? So it's a bit like saying, "Oh, Richard, I'd like to communicate with you at some time." And in the old days, we used to hand each other a little piece of card, which we called a business card, and there's my address, and there's my phone number, and maybe there's my email.
I still do that. Sorry, I'm very old.
No, fantastic. But what that's doing is saying, here's everything you need to know to communicate with me. That's what that does. So what if, in electronic terms, a database could tell you kind of everything it needed to know? And obviously, we want it to be secure, but what if we can make that kind of authorization bit as simple as we can, but as secure as we can? So those are the three kind of, hey, what if we don't have to know anything about how it works? We can use some transport that everybody understands and get the database to tell us all about itself. Technically, this is what OData is. It's a server-side technology that can return data to us without us needing to know anything about the underlying system vendor. Okay, so it's kind of agnostic, completely neutral. I'm going to ask a question, get some data. I don't need to know anything about the other end at all.
Test question. Margaret.
Yeah.
Margaret, that's not you, John. You know the answer. I got to test someone else. So when we talk about the vendor in this case, what is John potentially referring to?
The vendor is like the person that's wandering around attempting to access the database on their phone or.
No, that's the consumer. Because the
Okay.
vendor, he's talking, go back, can you go back, John, to that previous slide? Server-side technology to return data without knowing about the underlying vendor.
It's the vendor's FileMaker or the
Yes.
Okay.
But the idea is that if you have a methodology for doing this, then the same general methodology would work for SQL or Oracle or Salesforce or whatever the hell you were doing.
I was gonna ask to make sure I understood. So OData is essentially a way of accessing a FileMaker database without the person who's accessing it needing to know that it's FileMaker.
Yes.
Or anything else. We haven't even spoken about FileMaker yet. Okay. So here's the concept. If our interactions with database means that we don't have to do things about configuration, the traffic is a well-known REST-based web technology, and the database itself tells us the things we need to know about itself with simple authentication, that's the rules. So, and I don't need to know who's providing that. Okay. So, for example, SAP, that massive German thing, is mostly OData under the hood, but it doesn't present itself to you as a clever technology. It's just, hey, that's how we're doing this. So the history is, well, it wasn't, not everything that comes from Redmond is bad. Okay, let's just say that.
Okay.
There are some things that are terrible, and some of them are bad ideas, but they created OData back in 2007. And it went through versions 1, 2, and 3. And then in 2014, so 10 years ago, they handed off the technology to an organization called Osos, not the band, but an organization that does structured stuff, to kind of look after it. And it's part of their initiative to basically say, you can use it and we're not ever going to take you to court for the fact you've used the technology that we've invented from Microsoft's point of view.
With Microsoft, they would always be nervous about that, right? It's like, oh, you're using it. You're going to pay us, write us a check for that.
No, so that's never going to happen. Microsoft have kind of waived any rights to it other than that they clearly are the inventors. So when they handed it over, people took a couple of years to write up the specification for how things were going to work. And in 2016, which is like 8 years ago, so in the relatively recent past, OData 4 was published. And in 2020, the spec was very slightly revised, although your opinion on that when I tell you about it later is maybe it's not just a little bit. That's a brief history of where it actually came from. It stands for, although I don't know how they get there. It stands for Open Data Protocol, although the protocol word doesn't appear in it anywhere. But it's like ODBC, the O in ODBC stands for open. This is a protocol which is open. And Margaret, here's where the first time we're going to mention FileMaker, because now FileMaker can play with all of those big boys, because the engineers at Claris went, well, we'll integrate the OData libraries and methodologies into FileMaker server. So FileMaker can be a data source using OData in the way that any of those other people can. Okay, and that's key to understand. It's not about what we do it within the program. We've now just opened the door to anybody who understands OData to work with our data from our servers. Okay, let's go. That's a really big thing. It was introduced on the Linux version of the server in 19.1, and then it was added to both Mac and Windows in 19.5. So those of us who were on Linux had lots of time to play with it before everybody else caught up. And since the beginning, I might talk about this later, the data that you get out of the server was measured.
Oh, yes.
And you kind of had an allowance. So you had an allowance, and the allowance was 2 gig per user per year. So the minimum of 5 user licenses, it's 120 gig of data a year. Now, you have to go some to kind of reach that point. I do know apocryphal tales of people whose web programmers have managed to go through their whole allowance in about 2 months because they didn't think about caching the data, but that's a whole separate thing. So it made people a little nervous. I'm going to say that's one of the reasons why maybe OData hasn't necessarily had a free ride to this point, because we don't like the free tier, which suddenly gets bumped up to $40 a month when we've reached a bit of traffic. None of us like that. We want to be in a predictable space. That's just a personal comment.
No, it's all good. Personal comments are welcome. So yeah.
In the latest release of FileMaker 2024 version, the spec was bumped up from the 4.0 to the 4.01, and that is important to know later on in the week. How do we make it work with FileMaker? You go into your server admin console, click connectors. At the bottom, there's an OData tab, and on the screen, there's a little button that you just need to click to turn it on. Okay, so that's all you need to do on the server. Literally, just go and turn it on. In your FileMaker file, if you are going to do this within FileMaker, which we'll cover now, then you need to set up a user that has a privilege set, and I recommend, being as restrictive as you really like for this user. So don't allow an OData user to delete records, for example, for the moment. And at the bottom of the extended privileges is that little tick box. You're going to give this permission, access via OData, to a specific user with a username and password. So if we're using it in FileMaker, that's the other step we have to do. But we don't have to be using it in FileMaker. This is like if you want to work from your FileMaker desktop to FileMaker server with OData. But that's actually a little bit further down the line, to be honest. But now you're kind of going, okay, you've told me all the bits I need to know, done a history lesson, showed me where I need to turn things on. Let's go. This is like learning a new language, because there are lots of terminology that we need to learn. 2 places to go and do that learning. So, your homework overnight is to go and at least have a quick look at odata.org and learn.microsoft.com with that link. So they've got lots of documentation. You might not understand what it says right now, but those are key links to find out things. And understanding that the principle of REST is that everything at the other end is a resource. Everything's something that can be given back to me, but I can navigate to where it lives, okay? So in terms of the specifics, so this is like a French lesson or a German lesson or an Italian lesson. OData calls things different to how we do. So a resource is the thing at the end of a URL. An entity, which is described by an entity model, is how it describes what we store inside our FileMaker servers. A collection has a very specific name. It's about an array of JSON objects. So if you return an array of values, it's called a collection. But it's also about navigation. Navigating, can I navigate from where I am to where something else is? That will become more apparent later, but it's called a navigation property. These are concepts that aren't quite FileMaker, not just because they use different words, but because they're not quite FileMaker. So, important notice. What we will learn can absolutely be used from inside FileMaker to communicate with our or other people's FileMaker servers. Okay, but all of the knowledge about what OData is doing and how it works will enable us to interact with other kinds of services that are presenting themselves in OData. So everything about the Microsoft Graph API, setting up users, creating groups, assigning users to groups, creating email accounts, everything in the Microsoft Graph API is OData. And when you read the documentation, it becomes obvious that, oh, actually, that's language that I now understand because it's using the terminology and the way of presenting stuff that it's the same knowledge. So that's the first thing. We can use the knowledge that we're going to gain to interact with other services which present them as OData. But this one is, for me, the really big one. Our FileMaker data can be made accessible to people or software who already know more about OData than we're ever going to learn. Okay? Because, let's just go back to that other one, FileMaker is just another source on a list which says, you can talk to me using OData, the OData protocol. Okay? So that could just be web developers, but that can be enterprise level bits of software. Some of the things like Power BI that Microsoft produce, or Click or Tableau, can connect to our FileMaker data sources using OData, and that's the key thing. It's a big shift in mentality. It's not just about what we can do, because Claris have invented a clever thing. We're using something from the outside, and because we're using something from the outside, everybody who already knows about it can do exactly the same. Do you any questions on that point before I dive on?
Are you suggesting that it's a security risk, or it's just something that you can take advantage of?
It's an advantage, basically.
Got it.
I mean, yeah, if you turn on a pipe, an access pipe for people to use, there's security considerations there. He kind of mentioned that a moment ago on that other screen, right? Where you limit what the person can do or what data they can see, things like that. But the idea is that once you learn, if you know how to talk to FileMaker, you can talk to other things. And if people are using OData and they don't know anything about FileMaker, they can get data out of your FileMaker database and not know about FileMaker. If that makes sense, they don't have to know anything. All they know.
So all of those kind of clever tricks that we've done to make FileMaker, like monstrous anchor buoy kind of things, well, maybe that's just like an internal thing about the way we're using the program. Somebody comes to it from the outside will go, that's mad. What are you doing that for? Do you know what I mean? Because they're just viewing it as some tables with some rows and columns that might be linked to each other. But I think it's a key thing to understand. So again, we haven't actually done anything in FileMaker yet. We're kind of going, hey, this is why OData is a big thing. So we're going to generate something we can put in as a URL, and the structure is HTTPS. It only works with proper servers with SSL certificates. Your server / and then this little bit. So if you use WebDirect, you know that you go / FMI / WebD. Here, this is the bit that needs to go after it. Okay. So here.
Is there 4 versus 401?
No.
Because you have 4 is 440.
That's a great question. And the answer is no, it's just v4. How it's happening on the inside isn't in the URL. I'll show you where later we can modify that behavior.
Okay, that's fine. I'm sure I jumped ahead. I just thought I'd ask the question.
No, I mean, the point is, hopefully you're thinking about what we're doing and going, oh, okay. So you might end up with a URL that looks something like this. HTTPS, your server, FMI, OData v4 / a file is the basis of everything that we're going to do. Okay. There's some more language to learn as well, and terms. We're just going to do something about the first one for the moment. We're going to get to the others kind of later. So this is like, hey, day 2 and 3, we're going to learn some advanced French. If you have turned on OData on your server and literally just put that into a web browser, you're going to get to see something. Okay. Now, do you want to break to do a live demo of this as well? Because that would be cool, right?
Absolutely. Show us something real.
We're using one of Richard's servers with a file. Obviously, there's a bit of a time lag because it's somewhere on the other side of the world relative to me. But I'm going to go in.
Margaret, if you have questions, you want to throw them out, feel free.
So is the allowance in effect of OData, or is that from FileMaker's side?
That's from FileMaker's side.
So OData itself has nothing about allowances. That's just how FileMaker wants to make a couple dollars on it. So
yes, correct. Now, hush hush, that may not last forever. We'll just say that for the moment. We might kind of expand on that later. But I do think that's one of the reasons potentially why. Is that right?
No, you need stream in front of that.
Yep. There you go.
There we go.
There you go.
So we're going to go fmi.odata.v4.
Oh.
Bingo.
So these are the two files on the server that have a privilege set with the FMO data enabled on the extended privilege.
Or these are yes, probably, I think is the answer to that question. It may also be that these are the two files that have sharing turned on, but that's not it. So both of these files have a privilege set that have OData turned on in the file. And so I can see these files. Now, to be fair, I absolutely can't do anything with them at this point. But this says, hey, there's OData and it's working. So that's the first thing, Richard, it's working on your server. If I click this one, this is the one that we've kind of set up, then immediately I'm into security world. I'm asked for a username and password to go any further. Okay? But that just shows it's actually working. If I'm not going to do it. If I turn it off, you'll get a 503 bad gateway error if OData's not on, just as a kind of bit of a clue. We're going to now go, okay, we now know what the file is, and I'm going to go and log in a moment. And this is what we're going to see, okay? So I'll log in with mine. These are, OData calls it entity sets. To us, these are the tables in my file, okay? I have, and we're going to click on this one and see what's in it. And it's got one record, it's got a primary key in it, and it's got a record ID of 1. If I just go back and look at the others are in fact empty because we're going to work with those over the next few days, okay? But I can see what's in the database. Now then, here in the browser header, you can see that it's included $, format is HTML because we're looking at it as a browser. So if I change this, magic is going to happen. Oh, I can get the same data back. Let me find my window. Oh, too many browser windows. There we go, come back. So that's the same data I was just looking at as HTML as JSON. So if I'm a computer and I've got a username and a password, I can get back this data in computer language, yeah, because it's JSON. This is it presented as HTML, human readable, all that kind of stuff. But if I do format as JSON, then I get it back as JSON. And for the purpose, if she's still here, of Beverly, who we love a lot, you can also get it back as XML. Okay, if that's helpful to you, it's the same data. Okay. There's a context, and then we have some. There's always in the value. There's an array of values. Okay. and they are a name, a kind, and a URL for how to get there. But if you're another computer, you can possibly know what to do with that, particularly if we go to the next step, which is this command here. So this now says, right, I know there's a file here. Tell me everything about this file, not just like the basics. So that's the first thing, is it's just showing me, hey, which tables do you have? If instead of this, I change the URL to be / metadata, then this is, so about 15 slides ago, I said, hey, what if the database can tell you all about itself? Okay, so you don't need to know FileMaker. It's just some tables with some fields in it. Here's what's in the clients. There's 3 fields, and this is the type of field. And here's what's in the items table, and here's what's in the projects table, and here's what's in that the parent demo thing, and here's a related one. Now, because on the relationship graph, I have joined the demo to the related, it also knows about our FileMaker relationships. So it knows that this table here is in fact related to this table here. And conversely, this table here is related to the back. All that is there's a line on the relationship graph. But these things that it's showing are not tables, they are table occurrences that are on the graph. Okay. So it works.
Oh.
It works with table occurrences. If I go into the file, so let me just do that, and we're just going to prove that. 1 second. This one here. Go into the relationship graph, and I'm just going to add. Again, sorry, this may just take a while. I'm just going to add just another table occurrence, okay, on the relationship graph. If I go back now to, so let's take a second. Okay, if I go back to my browser here and I refresh the right one, I should see a second occurrence of the client's table called clients_loaded, which is what I just set up. Okay, so that's like a key thing to understand about OData. It works with table occurrences, but it knows about the lines that you have put on the relationship graph to join things together. You don't need them for OData, but it knows that they are there, and there's a link between these 2 tables. Okay, questions from that?
Margaret, you might have a question, but I want to ask this to you. So how is this different than, and this is for Margaret, WebDirect? It's very different, right? But can you articulate how it's different for me? Because it's an important concept.
WebDirect is basically interacting with the database directly. OData is stripping the information out of the database and showcasing it you in a variety of different, I don't want to call them languages, HTML, JSON, XML. I don't know what the official term for that is. I should. I don't.
Well, let me try this, and I'll let John correct us both. So you're right, Margaret, but I would articulate it differently. I would say that if you're in WebDirect or Pro or Go, you're experiencing not only the underlying data, but the full presentation layer of FileMaker, where you present the interface. OData goes beyond that. It doesn't care about the layout presentation. It's giving you the raw data, which means that if you're trying to enforce some sort of knowledge or understanding or something in a layout, that will be omitted and removed as part of the OData dump that goes. Does that make sense, Margaret? So that's, yeah. So John, you want to correct that a little bit if you want, however you phrase that.
The thing that we have always said is one of the killer features of FileMaker is we have a data layer we have a scripting engine, we have an interface layer. It's all in the one package.
Yes.
Okay? So
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
the difference between us and SQL is that you can get all the data, but you still have to write like a massive PHP front end for your website to show the data to anybody. And that's like a separate specialist skill, and it's not as easy as it sounds to do that. You know, you can feed it through libraries and frameworks. This kind of steps back or sideways to that being the eventuality. So WebDirect takes a FileMaker layout, does a reasonably good job of presenting it in a web browser window with everything that you've created in the layout, the colors on the buttons and the fields and all that kind of stuff, blah, blah, blah. Here, you're going to go, give me a list of all of the clients. And I'm going to go, there you go, there's a JSON object with all the list of the clients. Now, what do you want to do with that? That's up to you. Do you want to show it in an app? Do you want to show it as a web page? Do you just want to send it to another service? Like, I've created all my clients in FileMaker. I want to push it out to QuickBooks or whatever. So it doesn't have to hit a rendering mechanism. It's the raw data though. That's the key thing. And the fundamental difference between this and the data API is that the data API has to work with a layout to get the data out of the file. Okay. Now those layouts don't have to be customer friendly. They can be like utility layouts that are all gray and white. But the OData engine uses a layout. This uses the raw table occurrences. And that's one of the fundamental differences between the two things.
Margaret, you understand what we're doing with this, right? So the entire presentation, the layout design, the beauty of Nick Hunter's layout design is flushed down the commode.
I would argue in some ways it's the entire point to pick up FileMaker when you learn it, because I can't imagine picking up another database and then having to deal with the fact that there's no actual.
You are, Margaret, to be honest, and everyone here should understand this. If you're, I know the people have been around the community have thought about this, but you were spoiled by a vastly superior tool in what the FileMaker platform provides. It provides things that you can't generally do in other places, and if they do them, they generally suck. Now, you're going to find a better database engine somewhere, I'm sure, quite a few places, but you're not going to find one that's coupled with business logic and this graphical interface that does this so well, right? And so you are spoiled, Margaret. I apologize as your father for screwing you up.
If you got friendly with a good web designer who really knows how to write interactive websites, you can go, hey, here's how to get all my data and present it. So that's not like, hey, let me present all my data to the world. But if I want to have a system where students can upload things or get data back out of the system to show their current grades, you can be writing a web-based thing that does that. And that web-based thing has a chance to be prettier than WebDirect, because WebDirect itself has some limitations. That's the secret. That's the secret. No, that's a secret. No, that's the poor child that nobody wants to talk about.
Real quick, so if you're building a website, so you have a company database and it does something important, and you decide that you need a public-facing website and WebDirect because of licensing issues or whatever issues won't work, and generally it doesn't work. WebDirect doesn't make great public-facing websites. If you have a limited number of customers or a select group of people that want, it makes sense for that. But if you're going to have 5,000 people access your database, WebDirect doesn't make sense for performance, all sorts of reasons. So the question becomes to you, John, would you prefer to use DAPI or would you prefer to use OData as the mechanism to drive information back into your website? What would be your choice there?
Well, I'm pushing people to consider OData as the source. There's a kind of technical reason why you can't put 1 million people on a website that's getting data out of FileMaker. It'll crash FileMaker. That's like a ridiculous thing. No. You wouldn't be using FileMaker for that. But you know, if you have a thing that's got smaller users, that's the right kind of size project, and you have people in the organization who have web skills, and you know, frankly, everybody who's 21 and just come out of college thinks they have web skills. So you can go, here's what you need to know. Now go and build me a thing, and then I'll tell you whether it's any. I'll tell you whether it's any good.
Yes.
So let's push on. So here's a quick screenshot of that thing that we just saw live. Down the name column, this is from a different file. Where there's a star, that means that OData regards it as a key field. Okay. We've set it up in FileMaker to be unique, and that's all you need to do to make it a key field. There are some of the other options that we have, like maximum length and auto enter current date, are there. Indexes may or may not turned on. It knows whether it's global. There's a key and things. You can go back and watch the video and do a quick test with your own thing, and you'll start to see that and just start to understand what it kind of does. That's the same thing in JSON. We'll skip over that. So let me repeat, in case people weren't actually listening or dozed off. Somebody else does not need to know anything about your FileMaker file and how you set it up to get access to the data that's behind it. And the file itself will tell, it's good mannered, it must be very British, it will tell the other user what's in here. Okay. So you just go, it's there, here's a username and a password. You can go and find out what's there. You can go and find out what we've called all the fields yourself. And so you can get that out of JSON. And obviously we're going to, hopefully over 5 days, talk about some of the implications of that. The real list of the parts that we're going to work with is a request. A long URL string that's got everything in it, not just the where to find me, but what to do with what you get when you get there. We need to understand how to send headers, because some of the things are not in the URL string because inherently that's insecure. They get sent as headers, and particularly username and passwords. So not my job, but you are going to have to get used to some curl commands. I prefer when you see my code, I prefer the -H, capital H version, as opposed to -- header. They are in fact identical. I just think that typing the extra 7 characters I don't have time for that. My life's too short. What you will get back is JSON. You can technically make it XML, but what you get back is JSON in the body response. So ask a question, get a piece of JSON back. Oh, that's just like every single other thing we've been doing for the last 5 years, isn't it? Talk to QuickBooks,
yes.
talk to MailChimp. We're used to ask a question, get some JSON back. But you will also get back some response headers. So the things that you need to send are an authorization header. Now, there are places here where the spaces and the capitalization are in fact important. So just do what you're told if you haven't ever done this before. Copy and paste. So an authorization header, it says, hey, here's where the password is. The advantage of OData is it's called basic authentication. I just send the username and the password every time I make a request. I don't ask for a token, then have to store the token and then do things with it. I just include the username and password every time. Where that says ABCDEFGH, it's base 64 encoded username : password. Okay. And just to make it easier, get used to using base 64 encode RFC, which is the one that won't do carriage returns in the middle, because that will really screw it up. So yeah. So the header is authorization : basic space, and then this bit of base 64 encoded stuff. Depending on what we're doing, we're going to say, oh, I would like to accept from you some JSON. And so the accept header looks like this: accept : application / JSON. When we get to creating records, I need to tell the server what I'm sending it. So that's what content type does. So if you're doing things with web services already, then you will already know this stuff. But this is just for the people who are new to the game, just laying everything out from the beginning. And then obviously
Yeah. Good.
Go on.
No, you're good. I was just going to say, are we going to use Postman at all? I mean, we really don't want to get into that, but how are you going to format this stuff?
That is on the cards. That's number one item for tomorrow.
Okay.
But we have to
I'll shut up and not jump ahead. So
no,
sorry.
that means you're thinking and you're wanting to know. So obviously we have to tell it what type of action it is. Get, post, patch, or delete. A get says, could you give me some answers? Post says, could you make something for me? Patch says, can you update this? And delete is pretty obvious. There's something special, which is in certain circumstances helpful, -- location. So when you click on a website and it redirects to somewhere else, this basically says, hey, if when you do this thing, it sends you off to another location, just follow. Don't just stay there. And
okay.
And this header, it's optional, but with this header, you can tell it what version of OData you'd like the answer to be in. So I can say, I'd like the maximum version to be 4.0 or 4.01. Oh, there's a bit of a treat coming up for that. But those are kind of the constituent parts. So our hello world would look something like the first bit of the URL we've seen already. And sorry, that's the mouse slip. And then
there we go.
The headers and the authorization and so on. Now,
okay.
Let me see if I can, in fact, do this here. So I do have Postman.
So Postman, Margaret, you've never been to the training for this before, but it's a great tool for building a HTTP command with curl options, right? So it's basically, allows you to build this stuff. So
okay, so I got Postman off the screen. I just kind of copied and pasted a quick command. I'm going to literally paste it into a terminal window. Okay, like that.
Okay.
And bingo, there's an answer. Now, that is in fact the metadata answer that we showed you before. So this says, hey, it's working. You can see that it works in terminal. I've pasted the whole command, which has in fact included the authorization header. And this bit here, starting from there to there, is the answer that I previously saw on the web browser. So that is any bit of software that can issue this request with these headers can get the answer back from FileMaker. It's not a lot of use in terminal, let's be honest. But it means you don't have to have any fancy software to even just test that your own stuff is working. So that's like hello world. Hello world encoding. It's like, oh, I've done a thing. I've written a proper URL. I've pasted it into terminal. Oh my goodness, it works. Bingo.
Yes.
And that is your first OData call.
Okay.
Anything that can connect to a URL and send headers can get a result from your server. So that feels like I'm repeating myself, but it's really key to understand as to why OData is a big thing. Because anybody who's got the skill can connect to your data. And that is in fact where we've got to for tomorrow, which is like just over an hour, which feels like a good thing to me. So any burning questions that people have got right now?
It looks like DAPI and OData have separate yearly data limits. Is that correct? And therefore, can someone use them both separately in different areas of the apps to save on data usage?
Yes, technically. But okay. So the thing about to understand about these metering things, we will have talked about this in the past. It's only data that's coming out, not data that's going in. It's when you ask a question, you get an answer. That answer is measured in terms of how many bytes it is. Now, that means if you're smart about making your answers as tiny as possible, you get more chances to ask a question out of your total data allowance. I think a number of years ago, I think when he did the Billy Bass demo at a DevCon, Wim kind of went, if you're literally just kind of asking for a quick little thing using OData from FileMaker Server, you'd have to be asking something like 5 times a second for the whole of the year if it's a small enough payload to burn through your data allowance. It's when people go, give me every single thing about every single thing, every single record. And we have been really bad about having big fat wide tables with 700 fields on them. Because, you know, there are people who've done that. I haven't myself, but I will in fact kill people who do that. But, you know, there are things to understand here, not just about the mechanics, but about how we program what we're doing so that we can take advantage of it in ways that make sense. Yeah. And hopefully over the next couple of days, we'll learn some of those. So.
All right. Well, there we go for today. That's into Monday, I assume. Margaret, are we good? Any other questions we want to answer before we push on for the end of the day?
No, someone asked a very advanced OData question. So I'm just going to put a pin in that and save it for Friday.
Do you want to go ahead and just shoot it to John in advance so he has it? That'd be great.
Copy and paste. Because if there are any questions, then obviously I can prepare some material to like show the answer as opposed to just tell the answer, which would be good. So
I appreciate it, John. We'll catch you tomorrow. Same time, same station. There's our schedule right there. Yep, same time, same place. All right, guys, everyone. See ya.
See you tomorrow, everybody.